The purpose of this video is to talk about who you are and how you become that person you are. This is supplemental to Chapter 2 in your text, Interpersonal Communication and Self, and it is not in your textbook, but largely adapted from Julia Wood's textbook, Interpersonal Communication, Everyday Encounters. First of all, I want you to do a little exercise. I want you to, just on a scratch sheet of paper, write down 10 phrases that describe who you are. I am a mother. I am a wife. I am a good cook. I am funny. I am temperamental. Pause this for just a moment and come up with 10 statements that describe who you are. Now, the next thing I want you to do is I want you to number these statements. I want you to rank them in order of number 1 being the most important thing about you, number 2 the second most, number 3 the third most, so on until you've numbered them all. So pause this again if you would and rank your I am descriptions. Okay, next thing I want you to do, I want you to take number 10 and cross it off your list. Just take it off there. That is no longer who you are. That no longer is a quality or group associated with you. Does that change the person you are? It probably does. What if you cross off number 9? Now you're even a different person. The point of this is you are who you are not because of one distinct quality or one role that you play. There are multiple things that make up the unique individual you are. We're multifaceted, or as we talk about in this class, multidimensional. So if I took away anything, it would change who you are. If I added anything, it would change who you are. But you cannot be defined by any one thing. We're complicated. There's a lot more to us than that. So how did you get there? How did you get to all these qualities? That's what we're going to talk about today, how you got there and the groups that affected it. And there are 3 groups that we are going to discuss that affect who you become, how you establish yourself. First of all is your family. Second would be your peers, your coworkers, your classmates, those people around you. And third would be society as a whole. The first group I want to talk about is your family. And your family is a specific other perspective. By this we mean there's very specific people with names and faces who you know. I'm not just talking about families in general. I'm talking about your specific family. Your family is whoever raised you, whether that was 2 parents, a grandparent, a foster home, whatever that particular setting. The people who raised you and were influential on you at a young age are who we call your family. Some of the things your family does for you. First of all, they provide what we call direct definitions. They literally label things for us, things like our behavior. Oh, you're such a funny boy, such a smart girl. Aren't you pretty? Aren't you sweet? Aren't you stupid? Don't you ever do anything right? Literally, they're taking your behaviors and they're putting names to them for you. They also help us define our racial and ethnic roles. They might give you pride in your background or your heritage. They might give you shame in your background or heritage. But they're providing a lens with which you can view the rest of the world. Discrimination and being able to see discrimination probably happens at this level. If you were raised in a family that pointed out to you, hey, did you see what just happened over there? He was disrespecting that person. They're discriminating against him. You learn to see that particular situation as discrimination. Another person from another family may not have been pointed that out. It may not have been labeled as such for them. Therefore, they don't recognize it, the same situation, as being discrimination. Not either perspective is necessarily right or wrong. It's just the lens through which you're taught to see the world. Gender classification is another thing that our family members do for us. How should little boys act? How should little girls act? And teaching us those roles. I know I have 3 boys, and I'm oftentimes find myself doing the gender classification for them. Mommy, can I paint my toenails like you are? No, honey, little boys don't paint their toenails. Now, someday he can paint his toenails if he wants to, but right now I'm just trying to make it easier in the world for him and tell him that it would not be acceptable, for the most part, if he showed up to school with painted toenails. So sometimes it's more subtle things, like how we treat our children, maybe giving boys more challenges or not helping them as much, and helping our girls more, or not physically exposing them to conditions or competition or things like we might boys. So those are other examples of gender classification. There's an interesting story I'm going to post on under web links of interest. It's about David Reimer, who was born a boy. had a botched circumcision, and then they decided to raise him as a girl. And it tells his story, and it's very interesting. Take the time to listen to it. The second thing our family does for us is provide identity scripts, our roles, and how we'll perform those plots. So literally, they teach us certain behaviors. We see our family fight, for example, and maybe you have a loud, boisterous family who fights very argumentatively and loud, and then they make up passionately. Well, you see that, and you watch that, and you figure out that that's how you're supposed to act when you get into an argument. Now, you may make a conscious decision to move away from this script and to change it, but nonetheless, it's your default. It's what you're used to seeing and how you're used to, again, that lens through which you're seeing the world, how you think you're supposed to act in certain situations. And interestingly enough, those identity scripts are picked up by the time you're age 4. So by the time you're 4 years old, you've pretty much figured out how you're supposed to act in any number of given situations. Third thing that our family does for us is provide attachment styles, or help shape our attachment styles. And this theory says that your family treats you one way, and based on the connection or the bond that you have with your family, that's how you learn to bond and connect with other people later in life, and your significant others, your friendships, etc. There are 4 different attachment styles. Secure attachment style: you come from a loving family, they act like they care about you, they're concerned and loving, and therefore you're going to have healthy, secure, loving, concerned relationships later in life as well. A fearful attachment style: you may have a family who's abusive or rejecting of you, and you come to feel that you're not worth it. You're just not worth the effort. And so you'll take that with you later into relationships, feeling like I'm just not worth the effort, not try very hard in relationships, or maybe pair up with people who don't treat you well because you don't feel like you deserve anything better. Dismissive attachment style is when you have a family who might be neglectful or absentee. Maybe you have a parent who's just not ever around. Instead of coming to feel like you're not worth it, you're more likely to develop the attitude that they're not worth it. They're not worth my trouble. They're not worth my time. And then you take that attitude into relationships later in life, again, not putting much effort into them because you just feel like other people aren't worth it. And finally, anxious ambivalent. Anxious ambivalent's all over the place. Sometimes they're concerned and caring and loving, and other times they're abusive or neglectful. As a result, your attachment style is the same. You're all over the place too. Sometimes you pull people towards you. You can be very affectionate. Sometimes you're pushing people away for no apparent reason, and you don't really understand why. Most typical or classic example of anxious ambivalent is if you had an alcoholic parent or a parent who was a drug abuser. And when they were sober, they were a great parent, and when they weren't, they were an awful parent. Now, the thing I want to say about attachment styles: just because you came from a crummy family does not mean that your relationships are doomed for the rest of your life. It's a theory, and I certainly know many examples that go both directions. I know friends who came from awful homes that have great relationships, and I know friends that came from great homes and have awful relationships. I think, though, the thing with this is if you recognize a pattern in your life, you recognize that that's how you were raised, and you're seeing that manifest itself in the ways that we've talked about, learning to identify that is the first step towards being able to break that cycle and change and make a different decision to have different types of relationships in your life. So 3 things that our family does do for us: they define behaviors, they define gender classifications, they define racial and ethnic labels for us. So they provide those definitions. They provide identity scripts and how we should act in those roles, and they help shape our attachment styles. Let's move on to the second group, our peers.